Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we are starting a brand new book for this channel. This book is a very special book because it was written by a friend of mine who I met, surprisingly, while I was performing comedy. And something I don't think I've ever brought up on this channel, I used to do stand-up comedy and improv, mostly stand-up comedy. I did it for about close to 3 years. I started after graduating college, and I did it for a few years. Wasn't my thing. Eventually got out of it. But one of the few guys that I still keep in touch with from those days is the gentleman, the author of this book, Look Out on Parenting Here, a survival guide for the single parent by Ted Moss III. Ted is still a guy I keep in touch with. He's a jack of all trades, knows a lot of stuff, has a lot of wisdom, and just one of the many things that he has done is he has written a book on parenting. Ted is an older guy, closer to 70 years old, close to 70. I think he'll be 70 this year. I just hung out with him like a few weeks ago. I told him, hey, I'm going to do your book. And he said, well, why? Why would you want to do that? And he gave me his book as a little gift like a year ago or so. And I think it's an important book, especially in today's world. We're kind of talk about kids today and one author's thoughts on kids today, but I think people need to hear about parenting. I think parents out there, it's something that maybe some parts of it come natural, but other parts of it you have to work on. It's a muscle. And here's the thing, I'm not a parent. I'm only kind of guessing, but I think I'm going to get a lot of value out of this book. I haven't read it before. I'm reading it right now for the first time. And we are going to talk about basically the first. We'll keep that as a cliffhanger. You guys got to stick around to the end to find out what the hardest thing of all is in regards to parenting. Let's jump right into it. Again, why am I reading this book? I am not a parent. I don't have kids. I never had kids. Why am I reading this book? Because someday I will be a parent. And I think just from browsing this book before, like I said, I haven't read it before, just from browsing it a little bit, it's common sense stuff that I think often gets the most overlooked. And you can kind of put out study after study on what the right thing or the wrong thing is to do. And I think studies are great. I like journal articles. I remember I had a class in college where we did tons of reading journal articles, discussing them, bringing them into class and talking about them. But I don't know how well that works for parenting because so many kids are just different. And the way people parent in some cultures works for them. If you try to do it in other cultures, it wouldn't work like that. So the reason that I'm reading this book is I want to be prepared for the day when I do have kids. And I think the second bullet point there, are kids worse now than in the past? And according to one author, this Catherine Reynolds Lewis, she says they are. And I think that has a direct correlation kind of to parenting and where that has gone over these last many years in this country. She talks about how there's 3 factors that have caused kids to be less disciplined than ever. Why kids today are worse than they were, 50 years ago or whatnot. The first one is a dramatic decline in play. And I totally see this, especially with technology, handheld devices, phones, tablets, video games. Kids are now kind of off being by themselves a lot more. So they're not getting the chance to interact with other people, interact with the other kids. And they're not getting that used to that communication, just being around people. They'd rather be on their phones, off to the side, in their own world. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that when it's in balance. We always say, I've heard this before about roughhousing in kids and how so important that is actually for kids to do that, because you learn limits. Think about when you see two lion cubs biting at each other. They're not biting hard. Or maybe they do for a second, but the other lion then knows, maybe takes a swipe at the other lion cub and says, hey, too hard. So they learn how to temper like their aggression and the force that they put through. And I think that's really important in kids too, is you have to learn the boundaries of your physicalness, right? And also, when you're playing with other kids, you just learn communication. You learn what doesn't fly, how you have to behave, etc. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the growth of media. And specifically here, the mass media and news. And I think how it kind of ties to the first thing with what I was saying about the inundated with media, that our attention is so locked into that, we don't want to go out and explore the world and hang out with other kids, play with other kids, or have our kids play with other kids, etc. The last thing is the decline in communities and the connection to our families. So, and Ted kind of talks about it in this preface here, is that the days are gone where young parents would be close by their grandparents, close by their parents. So the parents would help them raise their kids, and they would be there close by to answer questions. Now, parents and their parents are more spread apart just because people got to take jobs elsewhere. They move to where markets are better, job markets better, etc. So much of this is just tied to your career path. Now, having said that, technology has gotten better. Your parents are just a quick phone call away, a Zoom away. You can video chat now. But as far as you don't have that physical connection. Your parents aren't there to help raise your kids. And this has also contributed to that decline. And I found all of this. There's my source there on the Globe and Mail website. There was a short article on this. Very, very enlightening stuff. Whoops. There we go. Ted comes out right in the preface and says this book was not written by an academic. And again, to echo something that we said earlier, it's not a study. This is just stuff that works. It's from a parent with experience. Ted I think he's got 4 kids, and they span from in a wide range of ages. So he's kind of been doing this for most of his life, raising kids, raising a family. And he did not have a ton of help from his family when he started his family. It's kind of a word salad there, but that's kind of why I think he wrote this book, is to help younger parents, the single parents, the divorced parents, right? To help them out when they don't know where else to go. And like we were saying, today's world, family members are spread apart. People are getting divorced. About 50% of married couples end up in divorce. That's from divorce rate by state, from worldpopulationreview.com. So I think this information is much, much needed for many people out there, many people that have families out there. So, infancy. Specifically, this book is going to talk about the toddler years, but the infancy years are no walk in the park either. Your child was not born with any preconceived conception of good social behavior. So now is your turn. That when the toddler years arrive, it's kind of your turn to buckle up and start teaching your child, start nurturing your child during the toddler years to now give them good values, good social behaviors, a way to behave and go out and be in the world. And you're going to teach them that. They're going to learn from you. You get kudos for getting through the infancy phase, but the toddler phase, I can only imagine, is something that's completely, completely different. And this is where we get to the first tip here of Teddy's tips. The first tip is let love be your guide. This is the primary responsibility of the parent. When all else fails, let love be your guide. The standards set when you care for your toddler will someday be found to be flawed. And we temper our actions and emotions with the love you have for your child. So no matter what, things are going to change. The way we parent is going to change, but what's not going to change is the love you have for your child. And you always do things out of love. Always do things out of love for that child. And you're just doing your best. Remember, 4 agreements. I mean, I feel like a lot of these tips can come from the 4 agreements. Just, you do your best. Always do your best. Always give your love. Even if you're, upset at your child, even if you're happy for your child, it always comes from a place of love. I think it's the same thing Rogan always talks about. Patrice O'Neill said that every joke comes from the same place. Every joke comes from, they think it's funny. Even if it bombs, it comes from the same place. They think it's funny. They think the joke is funny. That's why they tried it. I think same thing here. No matter if I get angry at you or happy at you, it all comes from the same place, from that same love. And I don't know what that love is like, because the love for your child Ted talks about here is different. It's something unique that can't be explained. It's different than the love you have for, a friend or your wife, husband, your parents. It's a different kind of love. And hopefully I get there one day to experience that. But tip number 1, let love be your guide. There we go. Tip number 2, create structure. So let me actually go to this chapter. Anytime, Ted says right here at the beginning of the chapter, anytime you have small children, you can expect chaos until you provide structure. And I like this word structure. It's not, to me, see, maybe to some people this would be a negative connotation. Structure means prison, bars. You have to follow orders like you're in the military. And I think structure is something different here. Structure is, as Ted points out in the second bullet point, a basic framework of social behaviors which are considered to be appropriate. Think of it like a framework. It's not rigid. It's something that evolves, right? This isn't prison and bars, something that's static that you're going to be locked into for the rest of your life. This structure is just things that are appropriate for your toddler years. And then as your kids grow older, I'm sure the structure is going to change, and your kids are going to get more responsibility. They're going to start to have more autonomy eventually. I mean, isn't that what happens to all of us, right? You get autonomous, you learn to, eventually you move out, you become your own man, woman, etc. But it all starts from creating structure for the child. And you do this by starting with, and I'm going to read here from page 6, you can begin by deciding what basic behaviors are required on a regular basis. It is best to start with behaviors that are overt and clearly obvious as to whether or not they are being observed. So some example of this. You take your shoes off when you come inside the house, and you put them neatly next to the door. You are dressed and ready for breakfast, by a certain time, right? And we dress accordingly. Make sure we have on clean shirt and shorts, etc. And then when you want to get a word in, you always say, "Excuse me." So these are kind of some basic ones, some basic like universal behaviors that I don't think anybody's going to like maybe argue with these. Ted, reading on, Ted says, these are not extremely important behaviors and certainly have nothing to do with the child's safety or survival. However, there are literally thousands of social behaviors that you will need to introduce to your children as they grow, which ultimately impacts their lives. So you need to set these behaviors. You have to have these expectations of what basic behaviors are appropriate, because what's appropriate for your house today, you need your children to carry over into the real world when they go out there tomorrow. And it's not going to be tomorrow, it's figure of speech, it's going to be later down the line, but you want them to behave in a certain way that's appropriate. Let's continue on what is acceptable. Oh, yeah, that's kind of basically what I echoed in the last bullet point there. What's acceptable today, what will dictate what they experience out in the world. So how do you go about giving these rules? So we just kind of said they should be basic behaviors, stuff that's required on a regular basis. The rules should be simple and clear, direct and serious. It shouldn't be given in a joking manner. And I can kind of tell this, I can kind of pick up on this now, like as I am today, when somebody's joking versus when somebody's serious, versus like when my manager asks me to do something versus when they tell me to do something. And I totally, even if I'm not in the office and we're just on the phone, I can pick up on that tone, right? So be clear, be direct. Your toddler, Ted says here, surprisingly, is going to know and is going to be able to pick up on your tone as well. So it's best to just be clear. And I'll add another one here, be simple. Oh, well, I had that in the first bullet point. Sorry, guys. Be very simple. Don't try to make anything so elaborate, so advanced. Just simple rules. And then as they grow older, maybe you can start to get a little more detailed with these rules, okay? Get ready to be flexible, though, and pivot your style when needed. Hey, not everybody's going to respond to clear, direct, serious, especially as your child probably grows into their own person, right? They start to get their own personality, I remember watching a Tim Tebow documentary, and right in the beginning, it was on his high school years, and there's kids who you got to rein back, and there's kids that you can push, right? And Tebow was one of those kids you could push, like really hard. I remember seeing this when I was on the working for the football team back in school. There's guys you can push, and you can yell at, and you can get on them, and they respond to it. And then there's other kids, if you try to do that, it's going to hurt them psychologically. So you have to go about it in a different way. So Ted lays out like a couple steps here that I kind of translated here. First step, state the rule. Second step, have them repeat it back to you. And Ted says here that the most important thing with having them repeat it back to you is they recognize and they're able to understand what you expect of them. And what he says is they should repeat it back to you in their own words. This actually is way better than if they just repeat the same sentences, same words that you said. Because when they say it back in their own words, it means that they took what you said and then they put it in a way that makes them understand it more. I think this totally makes sense, and I really like this point that Ted puts here, and I think repetition is huge in memory, in just like remembering things, remembering processes, like at work. Like the more I repeat something, repeat a process, the more you get better at it, the more you get used to it. Number 3, it's a group effort. So what Ted says here is the rules that you lay out to your children, to your toddlers, should be rules of the entire household. Now, this can change once they grow older, but for now in the toddler years, I think from what he was saying, let me go to that page. So to begin, make sure your rules... Okay, here we go. Notice how all of the above examples of structure state, we do this, we do that. This means that to be obeyed by everyone, including you. But remember, to your child, this really does confuse the issue. So, okay, I kind of skipped around a little bit there. Basically, at early on in this age, it's going to be tougher for the child to abstract between us and them. Adult, parent, people who are older, and them. So you should refrain from having that dichotomy in rules. Okay, you as a child are expected to do this, but for me as a parent, I don't have to necessarily abide by the same rule. Now, I think that's maybe why the rules should be basic behaviors, clear, simple, because they should be things that we all do. We should all say, excuse me. We should all take our shoes off when we come by the door. These should be things that we all kind of do. And I think importantly too, your children are going to see you doing those behaviors, and they're going to be more apt to do them. They're going to want to imitate you as the parent doing those behaviors. It's going to give him more legitimacy. Finally here, Ted says, leave out the logic, leave out the debate. You don't want to give the reasons why we do these behaviors, because then you just end up, will the child really understand the logic at that age? And you don't want to get into a debate with your child. So just explaining it more and explaining the logic behind it just ends up being a waste of time and energy. Anti-productive. You don't want to get in a debate with your child, especially how ridiculous do you look when you're debating a kid of that age, a toddler. Remember, you are the parent. And Ted says here, as the parent, or as the child, does the child have the mental capacity to decide what's right or wrong? No. That's your job as the parent. So, I guess to put it bluntly, is kind of like whatever you say goes. It's not up to debate. You shouldn't leave it up to debate. I think this happens a lot with, I think parents cave in to things. I think that's an issue. I don't know for a fact, but I think that might be an issue in today's world. Last tip here, be consistent. Kind of goes along with create structure. It's hard to obey rules if they keep changing. Think about that. Think about it from the child's perspective. If the rules keep changing, or if they don't see you following the rules, then it gets confusing to them. Then it kind of opens the door for debate. Well, they're not doing it. They said we all have to say, excuse me. Well, you're not doing it. Why should I do it? That's kind of, I think, where the mind goes when you're a toddler. So you have to be consistent. If you don't enforce consistently, it's viewed as optional, and you don't want these to be optional. You want these to be something that they do day in and day out. And I think I mentioned this on I think in the With Winning in Mind videos, I said this quote, and I got this quote from Ted about practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So you have to practice perfectly in order for it to be perfect. But if you just go out there and practice, I think this was with Winning in Mind. We were talking about the subconscious mind and your skills factor in practicing like a golf swing perfectly. It's going to get it down in your subconscious perfectly. That's the way you should do it. But again, if you try to administer that while you're in a match, like a live match, live game, anyway, that's more of the conscious mind, which you don't want to rely on in the actual game. I'm mixing up the books. Let's not even go there. If you're interested in that book, go to the playlist. It was a phenomenal book with Winning in Mind, Lanny Basham. Anyway, let's continue. Eventually, they will come to understand how some rules apply in certain situations and not others. But now would not be that time. Again, don't confuse them. Clear, concise. Don't introduce the logic. Yes, there's going to come a day where in certain situations, maybe you're not saying, excuse me, right? In certain situations, you're not going to have to be dressed up to the gills, right? But now's not that time. Now you need to be the parent. And again, you got to start with basic universal rules. And make sure that these rules are shared amongst all the caregivers. So make sure everybody's on the same page, because they could easily fall back off the wagon when it comes to these rules that you have set with when they go over to your grandparents' house. They're not following the rules. Dude, I remember this with whenever I would go to my grandparents' house, I would eat so many cookies. So junk food, cookies, pizza. And I remember I didn't think my parents really liked that much, that I was eating that type of food. Ted talks about here the rule of 3. This goes back to the repetition thing. Let me see if I can find this portion in the book. The rule of 3 states that if you do anything 3 times in a row, it becomes your job. So if you can get your child to do something 3 times, then it becomes hooked. The chances are likely that it's become hooked in their brain. Again, subconscious mind, right? That it just becomes, the skill is just in the back of your mind, and you can just pull it out whenever you need to. It's very innate now. It's just like a reflex. But this applies to you as well. So you, let me see here if you can apply that. Make sure that your child doesn't catch you not following the rules, basically, I think is what Ted was saying here. And try not to give exceptions. There shouldn't be exceptions to the rule. You should kind of refrain from doing that. Again, introducing logic, you don't want that. Clear, concise, direct. And these instructions should be specific instructions to start, but then to get them to be more general later. So if one piece of structure, one behavior is to like clean up your room, maybe you start off with specific instructions like, hey, get changed, get dressed, brush your teeth, pick up your toys, put away your books. Like you literally lay out the steps. And then the second night, maybe you scale back and you say, hey, get dressed, time for bed, brush your teeth, clean up your room. And then you just go, all you need to do is just kind of say one thing the third time, like bedtime. And then they know, hey, I got to get dressed. I got to brush my teeth. I got to put away my books, my toys, shut down the computer. I don't think your toddler would have a computer, but you know what I'm saying? So you use that rule of 3 to build from, you can use that rule of 3 to build from specific instructions to more general, is what Ted is saying here. And I think, guys, that was the last slide. We did it. Thank you guys so much for listening this far, if you made it this far. I'm really excited about this book. We're going to do tips 4 through 6 for next week. And I'm really excited. Thank you guys so much for listening to this. I'm really happy to do this book. A shout out to Ted Moss. And hopefully by the end of the series, we can do an interview with him and do a real deep dive on parenting, on his book, and life in general. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them down in the comment section. Please like and subscribe for more content like this. And this has been Chee-Tash. My name is Chris. Take care.